All right. I thought it would be pretty cool to just give a quick overview of some of the results we've just had from North Rockland's hockey team, who just trained with us for about 3 months, starting in around November and finishing up most recently last week. Um, I think it's cool because you see some of the results, and I think by me explaining some of this, it will give all of you a better idea of why we test, how we train, why we train the way we do, so on and so forth. And obviously, pretty excited with some of the results as well. All right, so here is our spreadsheet for North Rockland's hockey team. I highlighted a few important columns that you guys can pay attention to. There was 3 tests we did pre and post. And in red, one of the tests that we did pre and post is a 5-10. As you guys probably know, that's a test that I do with pretty much every single athlete. So they have a 5-yard fly-in, and we time their 10-yard zone. I highlighted this column in red because this was not a good column. This, if you look at the results, was actually pretty bad. For the most part, I would say approximately 80% of the athletes actually got slower on the 5-10 test pre to post. And that's not necessarily a terrible thing. It's obviously not what we wanted, but there's probably a reason for that, which we'll discuss in a little bit. And highlighted in green are the 2 other tests where we can see a considerable amount of improvement across the board. So the first test is the vertical jump. And on the vertical jump, which is pretty cool, you can see that every athlete other than one had an improvement on their vertical jump. And the average improvement was over 2 inches. So on average, the hockey team jumped 20.6 inches for their vertical jump when we pre-tested them. At the conclusion of testing them, after 3 months of training, their vertical jump on average was 22.89 inches. For those of you that don't know, a 2-inch increase in vertical jump is considerable. After a few months of training, it's going to slow down, and typically what we're looking for is something like 1 inch to 2 inches per year. So they increased over 2 inches on average over the course of 3 months. The second or last test, I should say, that we did was a peak power test on our assault bike, and this is a measure of the total work they're putting out over a given time period. And this test was actually pretty cool as well, in that every single person who pre and post tested had improvement on the peak power test. So they were producing more force over a shorter period of time. And some of the improvements were fairly staggering. The largest improvement was almost 500 watts. The average improvement, you could see at the bottom, on average, the hockey players were putting out 800 watts pre-test. At the conclusion of training, they were putting out on average 1140 watts for an average improvement of over 340 watts. So that's fairly considerable. And honestly pretty cool, where every single person got better. So what does all this mean? What do we do with all of this data? So when we're training people, there's a specific concept we're looking for specifically for athletes called transfer of training. This was pioneered by Anatoly Bondarchuk. He was a world-renowned throwing coach, where he coached several gold medalists at the Olympics. And essentially with transfer of training, what we're looking for is to transfer activities to our actual sporting performance. So 2 areas specifically I constantly tell our coaches that we're looking for are force production and rate of force production. So for force production, we have very specific force production exercises where our goal is to increase their ability to produce force. So the exercises that we're typically looking at for increased force production are something like a barbell clean, a barbell back squat, deadlift, and bench press. When we're programming things like this, they need to be heavy, and this is why all athletes have to lift heavy. We're looking for things greater than 75% of their 1RM, and typically this is 5 reps or less when they're programmed in the gym. As far as rate of force development goes, this means we're trying to recruit that force in a shorter period of time. We want to increase that rate of force development. So for these exercises, we're typically looking at cleans, jump variations, and medicine ball throw variations. Typically, these are a little bit on the lighter side, and this is usually 6 reps or less in the gym. Now, I think the question that we're really trying to ask, at least for this sport, is was there a transfer of training? Does resistance training carry over to speed on the ice? And unless we objectively said that, unless we objectively tested that, there's no way to know for sure, right? But all we can do is infer some things. So the first thing we can say is, in this situation, resistance training did not improve their running acceleration or running speed. This is evident by the 5:10, where 80% of the athletes actually ran slower. So what we have to do is objectively ask, why did they get slower? And the truth is, right, probably for several reasons, but one being they're just not sprinting at all. So they started here in November when we assessed them. My guess would be some of them were doing some outside training before hockey, and they were actually doing some sprinting. So like a case in point is someone like Montana Veet, who actually got slower. He was on the football team, and I can tell you right now, having trained them, they were doing some sprinting work, and his sprinting specific training was definitely higher. Come November, right, then we get into December and January, we're outside much less, they're on the hockey team, they're not actually running. That's my guess, is that they didn't have enough specificity for running speed. That's why they did not get better. And I think it's a reasonable guess or assumption. Then if you look at resistance training, and it showed that there was a carryover or a transfer of training to improving our vertical jump. We increased by over 2 inches. To increasing our power production, we increased our power production by almost 440 watts, sorry. And this is clearly objective data that we're looking at, and we can see these improvements. So to address this question, right, why did we improve the jumping and power production piece of this? That's because we were doing these things in the gym. I did have them doing box jumps in the gym. They were doing short, high-intensity sprints on the bike. So in my opinion, if you combine resistance training with those sport-specific exercises like jumping and power, you're going to see improvements in jumping and power. Now, will this carry over to things like speed or puck velocity on the ice? My answer is yes. If you have resistance training and then you combine it with sport-specific training. So what's sport-specific training? That's them actually getting on the ice, right? If they get on the ice and they're training on the ice, I can guarantee you, in my opinion, that the force production exercises like squats, deadlifts, cleans, the rate of force development exercises like cleans, jump variations, and med ball throw variations are going to carry over and transfer to their hockey performance, right? So that's it. I thought this was a pretty cool video, and honestly pretty cool objective data. If we look at them as like a case study, I think the results were pretty good. Most recently, they actually ended up winning their first playoff game as a 13 seed versus a 4 seed. So we'll see what they do in their next game next week.